Hi, I'm Callum Dicks and you're joining me today at the wonderful Maver Hayfield Lakes up in Doncaster. We've had some brilliant weather the last couple of weeks, so I'm expecting to catch lots of fish. I'm going to have a little walk around now, pick my peg, try and give myself some options to give myself some different tactics, and hopefully, have a brilliant day and catch a load of big carp. Right, I've chose my peg today. I've sat in the middle of the bank. I've got some lovely near side features. It looks good for margins later for some real big fish. I'm also feeding a close line, maybe 5-6 meters with 6mm pellets. But the conditions the last few days have been really warm, so I'm going to start my day fishing a long pole with shallower pellets. Now, one of the most commonly used methods when fishing shallower pellets is slapping, which I'm going to show you in a little bit more detail now. The first thing I do is before I ship out is to feed maybe 6-7 pellets. You don't want to feed loads. Try and pick a marker on the water so you can try and keep it as accurate as possible. Ship out to where you've just fed. Go just a little bit to the left to give you the momentum to wrap your rig back round. 1, 2, 3 and 4. The fourth time I leave it, so I make a lot of noise. There is some pellets in the peg from where I just fed, but I'm slapping again, making a lot of noise, and you got your hook pellet, the one pellet there. Hopefully you should get some bites straight away. It's a real great method of catching big fish and catching big weights. Right, as you can see there, I fired a few pellets just before I was shipping out. I've gone out slightly to the left, slapped my rig in 4 times to make plenty of noise, creating a lot of attraction towards my hook bait, and straight away I've hooked a real big fish. One of the most important things to do is when you're playing your fish and you're not actually fishing, is to carry on feeding. The people that work the hardest at this method a lot of the time will catch the most fish. So once the fish is under control, pick your catapult up, another 6 or 7 pellets, and if you can do that 2 or 3 times whilst you're playing your fish, whilst you're netting them, a lot of the time when you go back out, start slapping, you'll get bites and indications, or maybe even hook one immediately. If you can get yourself into a process where you know how many times to feed and how many times to slap it, and you get yourself into a real good rhythm and try and keep it the same every time. Don't have it so that one cast you might feed 3 times while you're playing them, or one fish you might feed once. Try and keep it exactly the same every time. So if you think that feeding 3 times whilst you've hooked fish is right, so just carry on doing that and carry on doing it. And once you get into a process, you can start adjusting it for how many bites you're getting. Like today, if I suddenly stop catching, I might back it off a little bit and maybe only feed once or twice, and you can start adjusting your system then. But if you can get into a real good rhythm, a lot of the time that's how you catch the biggest weights. And they're big fish as well. You really don't have to rush it. You can just get them back to your top kit. Really take your time. I always try and fish to a certain saying, but I'd rather not hook one and lose it. So if you just really take your time, all the people that catch the biggest weights tend to not look fast at all. They just plod along, they don't make any mistakes, and just get every fish in. Soft elastics, like you can see me using here. Some of the brand new retro Maver range. Really soft, but with the right top kits, with the strippers, you can just pull it out and just keep everything under control. The great thing is about this soft elastic, that is if I was to go out and catch a Crassio, maybe a pound, it'd be perfect, it'd be soft enough to get those fish in. But if I hook some big fish like I have done now, with the stripper and the right length of top kit, it's still fine. You can still get them out. With fish nowadays in commercials being A lot of fish being 6 to 10 to 12 pound. I mean, 10, 15 fish in a 5-hour match isn't a lot, but it's still a big weight. A lot of the time enough to win. That's why I can't stress to you enough about taking your time. Not always using the most aggressive gear. Just getting your bites, hitting your bites. Again, I feel like I need to feed. It's been quite a while since I've fed again. Keep the fish in your peg. Really work hard with your feeding whilst you're playing. So now I've fed 3 times since I've hooked this one. When I get it in the net, I might want to feed again, or maybe unhook it, feed, ship out, slap. That's what you've got to try and do, is get into a rhythm. Take your time when netting as well. It's pointless picking your landing net up if you know the fish is nowhere near ready to be netted. Just really take your time with it. End of the day, if you pick your landing net up and start scooping too early, all you're going to do is distress the fish even more. It's going to take you even longer to get it out. So just really take your time. There we have it. Another great big ghosty. Didn't take me too long, and there you go, 10, 12 pound plus. But once I got it in the net, carry on feeding, never forget. And there you go, a great process, big fish, a great method to catch big weights. Impossible. Right, you've seen me catching some real decent carp and a few crassio on a long pole, shallower pellets. Now, one of the most important things when you're fishing shallower pellets is to get your setup correct. Using the right floats, the right lines, the right top kits. And once you get that right, the feeding and the process of what you're doing is all up to you. I'm just going to talk you through the setup that I used and one of the most important things about fishing shallow. To start off with, the hook I'm using, it's not a big hook. I think most of the fish nowadays on commercials are very cute, they're very wise, and when the actual hook bait is sitting up in the water, you can't use a big hook. I've gone for a size 18 CS20 to 013 or maybe 015 with catching fish these size today. I've gone for a 4-inch hook length, which is quite a nice hook length. You can put your shot right at the top of your loop to loop if you need to. The main line itself is 020, which is very thick. I like to use big thick main lines when you're fishing shallow because it reduces tangles. Obviously the thicker the main line, the less tangles you get, the stiffer it is. The float I'm using is a very light float. It's a 0.2. It's a brand new range of floats we're doing. It's an MVR finesse. It's very short. So if you do want to fish maybe 4 to 5 inches deep, you can do. You don't want a long float that takes a long time to settle. You want something that when you slap it in, like you see me doing earlier, sits immediately with a little bristle. I prefer to use a little bristle rather than dibber style floats. I feel like you just hit and hit a few more bites, just a little bit more finesse. The 2 shot that it takes itself, it just takes 2 number 8s this shot with the weight of the hook and the pellet as well. I've just put them right at the top of the loop to loop of the main line, so when you're actually slapping your pellet in, you get a bit of noise from the 2 shot and the pellet on the hook. My rig itself, I'm fishing probably 14 to 15 inches deep, and I've gone for about a 10-inch line. Today I haven't missed any bites, so I can get away with a slightly longer line. It makes it a lot easier for yourself. But if you were fishing and you're in matching circumstances and you started missing bites, I would start shortening it down to the limit of whatever the rules of the fishery are. Some rules of the fisheries say you can only have an 8-inch line. If I was missing lots of bites, I would start cutting it down. The way I set my elastic up is a little bit different to a general purpose elastic where you use Dacrons. I've actually not used a Dacron. I'm still using a bead like you would with a Dacron, but actually after the bead I'm just using a length of elastic with a knot in the end. I can actually adjust the length of the elastic, of the actual bit of elastic past the bead, just by sliding the bead up the elastic. I can make it very short if I want to, I can make it longer. Now the purpose of this is, like yesterday I was fishing a match and I had the wind in my face, and when I was slapping my rig over, and not at any point did I have my line or any part of my rig slap over and turn over the end of my pole. With this, just kicks it out, so when you are slapping and you might have the wind in your face, it just stops any tangles, any catches on the pole, anything like that. It's just very, very neat, very easy to use, just a lot better than using your general Dacron connectors. The actual top kit I use myself is actually a dark side top kit, but I've chopped it right back to 6 foot in length. Now the beauty of this is that you've got a lot less elastic in your pole, so you're in more control of the fish, and when you get them back and you're holding your top kit, you can strip it out so you haven't got much elastic out the end of the pole. When you're playing the fish, they pop up very, very close to your keep nets and make it a lot easier to net. Now when you use this setup, it's all balanced correctly, you will land a lot of fish and you can use it very effectively and very quickly. It's really important that you put your pellet on correctly onto the band. The last thing you want to do is get into a good rhythm with your fishing, go out, start slapping, and your pellet will come off. What you'll find with a lot of the commercial fishery pellets is that you'll find an odd one in a batch of bag of pellets, maybe 6 mils, 4 mils, that'll have an upturn end. This is the ones I pick out to put onto the band. It just makes it a little bit easy for yourself. What I do, I put the band straight onto the end of the pellet where the up-grooved end is, pinch the band against the side of the pellet, and then wrap it all the way around. Make sure the band is right in the middle of the pellet. That just makes it nice and secure. The up-grooved end on it just stops the band slipping off the end of the pellet. There you go, on there nice and secure. That's ready to ship out, slap over, and catch as many fish as you can. We've had a great start to the day. We started the session fishing a long pole, shallower pellets. Now I've worked real hard with my feeding whilst I was fishing shallow, but the whole time I'm feeding 2 other lines. We've got a margin line and we've got a short, deep line. Now as the day gets later and it starts to cool down a bit, I would imagine that these 2 lines would be the 2 to fish. I've been feeding this line 6 meters on the bottom. I've been feeding it with pellets just by hand, odd occasion now and again, feeding a few with the pot. And I've gone straight in within 15 seconds into another big one. We've stepped everything up a little bit with gear wise going into there, because they are expecting a lot of big fish on these lines. But the 3 lines, if fed correctly and you work hard and you use the right gear, the right lines, the right hooks, the right elastic, if you can combine them through the day, that's when you catch a real big weight. I mean, if I started shallow, I've had a good start there. If I can go in on this line, have a good run, and then end up in the margins and have a good run there, that's when you'll catch for like the whole 4 or 5 hours and catch the biggest weight of your potential of the peg. Same again, real nice and gentle, take your time. A big fish on all lines today. I mean, fish of in excess of 12 pound, you really don't have to rush. Gone for a slightly heavier elastic on this line. I feel like the general stamp of fish is going to be bigger, not so many Crassio. Probably 70 to 80% are going to be fish of this size. It really is a great way, exciting way of fishing when you come in short, because you're expecting them all to be real big fish. Take your time again, keep it nice and low. Got proper gear on this line, so you don't have to be quick. You know it's not going to let you down. Just got all about being nice and smooth, patient. There you go. Another real decent fish. Doesn't take many of these to catch a real big weight. What I'll do, whilst I've got the fish out of the water, I'll unhook it, pop it in the keep net and talk you through the rig I'm using. I've just slipped another big one back into the keep net, so I'm going to take the next couple of minutes just to explain to you a little bit about the rig I'm using. I'll start from the bottom end. The hook itself and the hook length is very similar to the ones I've been using shallow. Same hook, but just everything a little bit stepped up in size, and the hook length itself is just stepped up again to 0.15 instead of 0.13. The hook itself is a 16 instead of an 18. Same pattern as CS20, but a really nice, just stepped up just a little bit, because the average size of fish I think I'm going to catch on a short line is going to be slightly bigger than shallow. We're also fishing on the bottom, so I think you can get away with slightly bigger hooks when you're fishing on the bottom as when your hook is exposed mid-water. The hook length's a little bit longer, 6 inches, so you can have your top shot just at the top of your loops, which then makes everything nicely in proportion. The shotting pattern itself, I've not gone for your general bulk and 2 droppers. Because I'm feeding by hand, I'm going to be feeding really regularly, so that means that fish are going to be on the bottom, but you might have some fish just off the bottom as well. So I've strung it all out over probably an area of about 18 inches a foot. That just allows you, every now and again, you'll flick the rig out and it will just come back in full a little bit slower, and you might nick the odd big one on the drop. I find that through a match, this might make a difference for 2, 3, 4 fish, but that can always be the biggest difference in matches. You know how close they can always be. The float itself is a Maver UFO 7, a 0.4. It's about 6 foot deep here, so a 0.4 is a lovely option. It's nice for any depths really, between 4 and 8 foot, so that sort of size float with the conditions we got seems about right. The float itself has got a nice thick hollow bristle, which is important when you're fishing for carp. You don't want to be striking at every last little movement, any little dinks or anything like that. The stem is wire, so if the wind does get up, you can just hold on to it and make sure it's nice and stable. The body shape itself, really slim, so if you're missing bites and you want just a nice slim float, just so it comes out of the water nice and cleanly if you do miss a bite, so you're straight back in. The top kit itself is longer than the one I was using shallow. For these big fish, I just want a slightly bit more elastic in my top kit, just to give me a bit more of allowance when I'm hooking them and hooking fish of excess of 10-12 pound. The elastic itself is a 10 to 12 retro dual core. Now this is a great elastic for real big fish between 6 and 12 pound. It's just really powerful but forgiving at the same time. When you hook them, it gives them plenty of room to swim off and tire themselves out, but when you do get them underneath within netting range, it really does make it power up and become very, very nice for netting fish. Generally, an all-round, a real balanced rig, a nice size hook, a nice decent hook length, real jawable main line, decent elastic. It's really important when you're trying to target these big fish to get a big weight to win the match. If it was a match situation now, we'd be coming into the last hour. The whole day while I've been fishing shallow, I've been fishing short on the bottom, I've been feeding my margins up to the next pallet, and now is the real time where I expect to catch some big fish and try and put a cap on a real decent day. This is the first fish I've hooked. Not long, probably 2-3 minutes after going in there, but I've been feeding it all day. Oh, it is a real big fish. I'd expect the average stamp in the fish in the edge to be between 8-12 pound, maybe even some odd 14-15 pounder. So it's really important that you've got the right gear and you feed correctly. I've fed quite a lot of bait, I've fed some micro pellets, I've fed some another great big ghosty. That's what's so exciting about fishing the margins. Every fish like this big. Another cracking ghosty. And that's what I expect them to be. If you can put 5 or 6 of them in the net the last hour, after a good start shallow, a few in the middle, short on the bottom, that's when you know you're in potential of winning the match. I've had a cracking day so far. I've started on a long pole shallow with pellets, caught a load of decent carp and crassio. I've come short on the bottom. It's not been great, but it's still been okay. I've caught some decent fish. I think the temperature is really pushing the fish up into the upper layers, so the margins and shallow are the 2 best methods for me. I've come in, I've caught that lovely ghosty like you've seen. Whilst now I've put him in the keep net, I'm just going to run you through the rig I'm using. I'll start from the bottom with the hook. Now I've gone for a size 12 CS24 to 0.17 hook length. Now this might seem quite obsessive, but the size of the fish that we're going to be catching in the margins really reflects the gear that you've got to use. At the end of the day, you're probably going to be looking to come into the margins with an hour, hour and a half to go. You want to catch 5 or 6 real big fish. The last thing you want to do is to hook one and lose it. And the last thing you want is to get snapped up where your gear's not quite up to it. The main line, again, 020, really strong and durable. Shotting patterns exactly the same as on my short deep rig, just all strung out over an area of about a foot. Again, when the fish are in the margins, it is quite shallow, so there's a very good chance you can catch a few fish on the drop. And normally when you can do this, they're normally a real big fish. The float himself I'm using is a UFO 10. It's a really short float, so if it is a foot 18 inches deep, I don't feel like my float's too long for the depth. I can still fish it in 3.5 foot of water like I have done today. It's got a fat hollow bristle again, which is important because I'm going to be using a big bait on the hook, a big heavy bait. Last thing I want is the float just to be getting dragged under with liners or the weight of the bait. It's quite a short, fat body, so it's nice and stable with a wire stem, so it just goes in and sits perfect every single time. Really stable, keeps really still with a big heavy bait. Same top kit as the one I was using deep short with the same elastic, the 1220 Retro. I can't stress to you how good this elastic is for big fish. For fish in the excess of 6 to 12, 10 pounds, these are the elastic for it. It's really forgiving, but it's got the real backbone to it to strengthen up even if you do hook one 15 pound. A longer top kit than what I was fishing when I was fishing shallow, just to give you a little bit more elastic, so a bit more allowance if you do hook a real big fish. All round, real strong gear, big hooks, big elastics to capable of getting all the big fish out you might hook in the last hour, 90 minutes of the match. A really great way of topping your match off, and if you can do this, go into the margins with an hour, hour and a half to go and catch 5 or 6 big fish. That might be the difference between coming third, fourth or winning. So all round, great method, strong gear, and catch yourself some big uns. One of the most important things I think when you're fishing in the margins is to find the right spot. Now what you'll find with most commercials, as you go towards the bank, the bottom can be really uneven. There might be some rocks, it might be sloping too quick, there might be bankside shrubbery that's lying into the lake. It's really important that you find the right spot to fish on. Today I've looked at my margins. Again, there's a platform next to me. I've plumbed up in front of me and straight away I found some rocks. So I don't want to be fishing on top of these rocks because you never know exactly where your hook bait is. It might be on top of the rock, it might be underneath, which will lead to foul hooking. I've put another section on, gone to the far edge of the platform, and I've found a nice gentle slope and no rocks, and it's all nice and steady. This is really important when you're fishing in the margins. Once you've plumbed up and you've found your spot, also feeding in the margins is very important. At the end of the matches, most people will chuck their bait in. So fish are really used to finding big beds of bait on the bottom. And when the fish come into the margins, normally is to feed, so they're quite aggressive and you want quite a bit of bait. Today I've chose to use micro pellets and corn. I've wetted down my micro pellets and I've got my corn ready to go, and I'm feeding quite aggressively. Maybe every other fish a whole pot full. I've started off my peg with 2 big potfuls, maybe 2 hours to go into the match, and then every other fish a whole big pot full. You can adjust from this, but that's a real good way of starting your edge swims because they're used to finding big beds of bait. So if you fish aggressively and you find the right area to fish on, a lot of the time it can lead to you catching some real big fish and catching a real big weight. We've moved off a Little Adams Lake where we've had some great success catching some great big carp shallow and in the margins. And then we've now moved over onto Island Lake where I'm going to show you 2 totally different methods, both for the rod and line. I'm going to start on a pellet waggler and then I'm going to move on to casting the method feeder close to the island. there you have it. We've learnt from Little Adams Lake that there's a lot of fish in the upper layers of the water. It's not that hot today, but it has been hot over the last week or so. We've caught a load of fish shallow. It's what made me fancy fishing a pellet waggler. I fired some pellets in and immediately got some indications. We've caught some skimmers, we've caught some crassio, and now we've caught some decent carp. I'd expect the stamp of fish to be really good on a pellet waggler. Same as when we fished on Little Adams shallow on the pole. And they do really scrap. I've been working really hard on my feeding, trying to feed as often as possible and cast as quickly and as accurately as possible as well. A lot of the principles that we learned from fishing on the pole shallow, you can take those principles and put them into your waggler fishing. You get the right setup, the right hooks, the right floats, rods, reels, everything, that becomes quite simple. But they really do scrap in there. Real decent fish, 5-6 pounders. Doesn't take long to catch a real big weight. I would expect, with the peg that I've picked here today, with an island feature as well, that these fish that I'm catching on a pellet waggler later on in the day will move into the shallower water against the island. There's a lot of fish topping here mid-water, which made me really confident of catching on a pellet waggler at the start. But as this starts to die off, as the bites slow down, what we'll do, we'll move further into the lake, closer to the island, into the shallower water. But what I'll do, I'll unhook this one, pop him on the keep net, and talk you through the rig and the setup that I'm using. Whilst the rod's in, I'm just going to talk you through the setup that I'm using. To start off with, I'm using a size 14 CS26 hook with a little bait band on, very similar to what I was using on the pole shallow, just a slightly bigger hook. The hook length itself is 0.19, so it's really strong line. I don't really see any advantages of going through a lighter hook lengths when you're fishing with pellet waggler. I've tried before and I've never really caught any more fish by fishing lighter. So a real strong hook length is really important. The main line itself is 0.20 Jurassic Classic, just a touch heavier than my hook length, but it's still thin enough that I can cast a 4 or 5 gram waggler as far as I can loose feed 8mm pellets, which is really important. Very strong, durable line still. The actual setup of this float is very simple. We've got 3 gripper stops, a sliding link swivel, and then 1 gripper stop just above it, not slid right down onto it, just giving you a couple of little inches, just a bit of movement. Now the great thing about the waggler that I'm using is the brand new MVR Finesse insert waggler. They come already pre-loaded up, so you don't have to mess about with putting any shot down the line, shotting it up yourself when you get to your peg. It's all done for you. When I'm pellet waggler fishing, I prefer not to have any weight below the float. I want all the weight in the float, and this one already comes perfect. I got here this morning, I clipped it onto the line, and it sat perfect with just about 1 centimetre of bristle showing, which is absolutely bang on. The actual weight itself is adjustable. You can unscrew it and take a couple of little discs off if you want the whole bristle showing, if visibility is not perfect, which is like it isn't today with the wind the way it is. The rod and reel setup itself is a Maver Reality 11 foot. Now I prefer 11 foot waggler rods when I'm fishing pellet wagglers, so if I want to fish up to 4 or 5 foot deep, I still can. 11 foot rod allows it when the fish come into netting distance and not too far up. Casting's easy. It's just a nice balance between having a short enough rod for netting and still giving you the capabilities to cast far. The reel is a 3000 Enigma. It's just a perfect weighted reel. It balances lovely with the rod and just an all-round really nice balanced setup, so you can cast as far as you need to and get the fish in as quick as possible. The conditions really aren't being kind to us today. The wind's getting stronger and stronger, but we're still working at it. We're still feeding really regular, casting real regular. We're still catching loads of fish. Just shows when you get the process of feeding correct, there's still plenty of bites to be had even when the conditions don't seem right. Like I said before, we know that the fish are up in the upper layers of the water from Little Adams. It's why I really fancied fishing the pellet waggler. Just get a feeling that if the conditions were a little bit better, we'd catch a big weight. We're still catching well, and they're really big fish. Don't have to be too aggressive, just take your time with them, make sure you get everyone out, and a general stamp is 5 to 10 pound, like that one there. Another absolutely beautiful carp from Hayfield Fisheries. Immaculate condition, really healthy fish. We saw yesterday on Little Adams Lake about when I was fishing shallow, getting into a process, getting into a rhythm of feeding, slapping and feeding and getting your timings right. It's exactly the same with a pellet waggler. The process I use, where I go to most places, is first of all, what I will do is I will cast out and try and aim 2 to 3 meters past where you're feeding. Then I'll wait 6 to 10 seconds for a bite, because a lot of the time you can get a bite as the float goes in. The splash of the float and the pellet goes in can sometimes trigger a bite immediately. If you've waited about now this long, I'll put the rod down on the rest. I will feed maybe 10 to 20 pellets 2 to 3 meters short of where my float is, and I'll take 2 turns and bring my float back right up into my bait. Now what this is doing is the pellet is falling when the float first goes in, then you're feeding, making some attraction, and then you're getting a second bite of the cherry. You wind your float in, the pellet comes back up and is sinking again. So twice in one cast, your pellet is sinking through the water. And 99% of the time, you'll get your bites either when the float just lands, you get a bite straight away, or when you reel in, reel back into the pellets where the noise has come from the attraction of the pellets going in, and you'll get a bite immediately. And what I'll find is the harder you work at it, the more times in the 5 hours you repeat this process, the more bites and the more fish you'll catch. Had a real good start on a pellet waggler, catching a handful of real big fish. But the conditions were getting worse and worse, and feeding was becoming very difficult. I couldn't fish and feed where I needed to catch the fish. I noticed a lot of fish topping near the island, so I decided to change tactics. And within 2 or 3 casts of getting some bait into the water, we're getting really consistent bites now. A lot of crassio, odd small carp, but I'm sure the way the wind is going and the amount of fish I can see in the peg near the island, this method's going to get stronger and stronger. Really having a great afternoon on the method feeder. Casting is really quite regular. It's quite tricky with the wind to get the accuracy correct, but every time I land it within probably 6 inches of a little green grass bank that we got out there, it's rang within 20 seconds. There we go, another ghosty. Really great fishing, really exciting fishing. Bites are really aggressive. They fight really hard and really quick bites all the time. The feeder setup that I'm using today is extremely simple. To start with, the hook length itself is 4 inches long. The rules here at Hayfield say that you have to have a 4-inch hook length, but if you could get away with using a 2-inch, do so. I think it's better. I think you hook more fish with a shorter hook length. The hook itself is a size 14 CS26 with a very small band on, just for banding any hook bait. The one I've used today is just a boilie white pellet type hook bait, or even just your coarse pellets is absolutely fine. The hook length material itself is 0.22. I think you've got to use strong hook lengths because you've got a big heavy weight just above the hook, so it does lead to breakages now and again. And when you use heavier hook lengths, the hook length becomes stiffer, so I think you hook more fish. Just up from the hook length, I've got a little quick change bead, so at any point in the match or any point in your pleasure day, you can change your hook length, you can change your hook, smaller, bigger, whatever way you want to go. The feeder itself is a 38 gram UFO inline feeder. Today the island is at about 40 metres, the wind's in my face, so casting can be quite tricky. With a slightly heavier feeder than normal, a 38 gram, just makes accuracy a little bit easier. The line I'm using is Maver Jurassic Classic 0.23, it breaks at about 10 pounds, so real strong, durable line. Where I'm casting today, there is a few rocks close to the island, there's going to be a few snags. When you hook fish, the line's going to be dragging through this. The last thing you want is to be fishing away and then your main line breaks. You lose your feeder, you lose your clip, your rhythm goes. The rod I'm using is a brand new Maver Diamond 10'6". Now, I've got to say this is one of the best rods I've ever used. It's the perfect length for casting to islands at this distance. It's not too long, 11-12 foot I feel like the accuracy would go, but it still gives you plenty of poke to make the distance and still become accurate. The reel I'm using, very similar to the one I was using on the Pellet Waggler, just stepped up in size. This is a 4000 size. If I want to go to 50-60 metres, I can do. The bigger spool just allows me to get bigger distances when I'm casting. So all round, a real strong, durable, balanced setup, perfect for distances and fishing of this nature. Loading the feeder when using the new Maver UFO feeders and loading spoon becomes very, very simple. The way I do it is a little bit different. I like to double mould it. So the first stage is to get the mould, fill it so it's overfill, press the feeder into it, and then you've got a full feeder. That's the first step. The second bit of it is to take a small amount, maybe a third of the mould full, place your hook bait into it, squash it down and repeat the process. Squeeze it into it. Now you've got a full feeder and an extra little bit. For fishing to islands, I like to have the full amount of bait in my feeder every single time. Using the mould spoon becomes very, very easy because you never get any stickages. The feeder won't stick in the mould at any point, no matter what the weather or how dry or wet your pellets are. Stick with this feeder and this mould, and it makes life very, very simple. You see the pellets how I've got them here. To get them exactly the same, first of all I get my dry 2mm pellets, put them in one bait box. I get another bait box, fill it with water, and then tip some of the water out of one bait box onto the dry 2mm pellets so that the water's just lipping over the top of them. Then I get the bait box that was full of water, place it on top so there's lots of pressure going down on the wet 2mm, leave it for half an hour, take the bait box back off of the 2mm, and they should be perfect every time. The most important thing for me when I'm feeder fishing, especially on lakes when I'm casting up to an island, is to be accurate. First of all, the most simple thing is to pick yourself a marker. Today on the island we've got a bit of grass and then a brick. I'm using the actual brick on the island as my marker, so I can aim at that brick every single cast. The harder thing to do is to get your distance correct every time. The best anglers, when you watch them feeder fishing, they'll be hitting the clip, hitting the island within 6 inches every single cast. The only way of doing this is with a line clip. Now the best way of doing it is to get to your peg in the morning, get your set up correctly how you want, and then start casting your feeder and dinking it in. Every cast a little bit further until you get your feeder in the exact right place. Once the feeder's in the exact right place, put your rod into the rest and clip up. Now that means everything's on maximum distance. It's virtually impossible to go too far and to go onto the island and snag up. What I do, I've got my clip dead right, so I'd load my feeder up as I showed you earlier, cast out, nice and accurate, hit the clip back and then lower the feeder in. So my line clip, as you can see there, is bang on, at full maximum distance, my rod's on the rest and the feeder's within 6 inches of the bank. This way you keep your distance perfect every time, get your marker dead right, and the more accurate you can be, the more fish you'll catch. Well guys, we've had a great couple of days fishing here at Hayfield. We've covered 5 different methods and caught on all of them. We've caught big fish on all of them, we've caught some crassio, we've caught some bream. It really has been an enjoyable couple of days. I hope you've picked up some tackle tactics and tip from everything you've seen, and I hope to see you on the bank soon.